talk is, sometimes I think, really, when we send our kids to school, or when we attend school if we're young people, what tends to happen is that people just assume that you know how to study, you know how to do well at school. And I think up to a certain age, that works and that's fine. But up to a certain point, it can become quite challenging to know how to study. I also think that times have changed significantly. So before, whereas when I was growing up, our main source of information was books, and things were very traditional, and the approach was very different to study. So really, you took a course, or you took, did lessons at school, and after some time you were expected to sit an exam, and then you either passed it or you failed it. And I think that very few people really teach in schools, and even at university, very few places teach the formula to success. And what can happen is that you're it's like you're in, you're traveling, and you're just, if the wind throws you one way and you're lucky, you'll be fine. And if the wind throws you another way and you don't know any different, then you struggle. And that doesn't really need to be the case. I think anybody can be a good student if we have the right tools, just like you could put up shelves if you knew how, but also someone gave you the right tools. So I'm going to talk about some of those tools. The first tool is really to believe in your abilities and to know your strengths, right? Some of the time what happens is that for some students, they don't know what their strengths are, or they don't think they're a good student, or they don't think that they're good at anything. And I think that can be quite crippling. So there's no shame in that, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be grateful. And in that process, He has given us different skills and different talents. But if you don't unlock them and use them and put them to good use, then they're essentially just wasted. And so recognizing that you have something that you're good at is an important step. So you can even go online, if you are a student or even an adult, you can go online, and there are different intelligence tests. And I'm not talking about IQ tests, because IQ tests are very specific. And again, they're a little bit outdated. But, there are multiple intelligence tests that you can take that tell you whether you're good at using your hands, whether you understand things better when you're listening, whether you understand things better when you're watching something. There are lots of different ways to learn. And good teachers in a classroom will use a variety of those different intelligences and plan with those within their lessons. But the truth is, at home, sometimes as parents, we don't necessarily know how to help our children, succeed. And so one is to sort of tap into what is it that you're good at, and is there a way that you can help your child in that process? So because I come from an educator's mindset, I know, for example, when my kids have struggled at things, I've tried to use those tools. So for example, for Quran, when my son was initially memorizing the Holy Quran and he struggled, I tried to adopt some of those principles in that process. So when he would find something hard, I started trying to color code, like I would photocopy pages and color code and see if that made a difference. And sometimes I would cut the ayahs so that he would have to know where they go and put them together. And I soon discovered that actually, subhanallah, when it comes to Quran, the best way is the way of the Sunnah, which is just to repeat it. And there is a formula to it as well in terms of Quran memorization. But really, there isn't any fancy schmancy way that you can do that. When it comes to the Holy Quran, again, having that open heart, open mind, and asking Allah to help you is usually the best formula. And everyone is different and can go at a different pace. But certainly with other things, science, social sciences, English, math, whatever the concept is, it's about breaking it down and understanding it and recognizing that, you know, you might not be, a lot of people will say, I can't draw, I'm not good at art. I hear this from kids quite a bit. And then you teach art, and those kids that say, I'm not good at art, or I can't draw, or I'm not good at this, will be the kids that are sitting there at the end and not wanting to finish, and you're saying to them, hurry up, you know, the time is over, but they want to finish that piece of work because they actually ended up enjoying it. So you have two sides to your brain, and if you can tap into the side that you're not using as much, you can become an artist and you can become a mathematician. So one of the things that's very important is to be organized. And I can't stress this enough, that actually one of the things that is holding kids back from learning is not being organized, okay? So these are very simple things, they're very basic things that everybody knows, but we rarely adopt. So you can use a planner. You know, some kids find it useful to make lists of things, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Breaking down assignments. So if you feel like that's a huge thing for me and I can't do it, then break it down into smaller parts. You know, if you have a big project at school, breaking it into parts, or helping your child break it into parts and saying, well, which part could you do first and which part could you do next and how are you going to tackle this, is very helpful to a child, because then they realize it's not necessarily one whole big thing that they have to start. And kids often, when they lack that organization in their mind, it's very hard to start. So that's where most often kids will just be stuck and they'll be frozen. So one way to help your child is to say, how could you break this up? Well, how about if we stopped here or we stopped there, and to break things down. Older students will find it useful to set themselves small tasks as deadlines, and you know, that works as well. You know, to use the right folders. It sounds silly, but sometimes organization can be the key to unlocking whether your child completes homework well or not. So, you know, having one colored folder for homework and one colored folder for classwork, and asking your child to separate and put them into piles makes a huge difference. I remember I did an experiment with some kids where I put lots of different weird objects on a table. You know, I put down a candle and a folder and a pen and some pins and lots of different weird things that had no real connection. But I asked the kids to sort them out, and I said, you can't look at each other's choices. So the first child sorted them out into piles, and then I wrote down what their piles were. And then I asked the other student to do the same thing. And she chose very different things. And then I asked them why they put them into those piles. And you know, one student said, well, I sorted them into colors because I thought these were all similar in color and these were similar in color. And the other student said, well, I sorted them into uses. And so I felt that these were things that smell nice and these were things that you could eat. And it's fascinating. So we all think differently, but organizing can help us understand things in a better way. And so, you know, getting yourself organized with the right tools is important. Having the contacts of others who can help. So, you know, sometimes we feel shy to ask, but we should ask. If we feel we know someone who might know something that helps us, we should ask. I once had a parent who their daughter was at Abrar. Years ago, I was principal at Abrar School, and when we were there, this father came to me, and his daughter was struggling a little bit. And he said to me, you know, I'm not sure, but I feel my daughter is struggling. What do you think I should do? And at that time, I didn't realize that resources, even in the public school system, are limited. So I said to him, you know what? You're probably better off putting your daughter in the public school system because the resources are higher. If she is struggling, if she has a learning disability, then, you know, it's going to help her if you put her through that system. So she was finishing grade 3 at that time. He was very grateful because he said, I really appreciate the fact that you're not wanting my daughter to come back because you'll lose the fees. And the kids, when you're in an Islamic school, kids are not fees. They are people, and we want them to succeed. So I advised this father to do this. Anyway, he kept in touch. And his daughter would study Quran in the evenings when my son was studying Quran in the evenings. And he said to me, she's still struggling. She's completed grade 4, and they've assessed her, and she's reading at grade 2 level, although she's in grade 5, and her math is at grade 3 level. And he said he was very worried, and he said, I just don't understand why that would be the case. She enjoys reading, she's excellent at Quran memorization, this has really shattered her confidence. What can we do about this? And so he said to me, could you help? And I said, well, I'm not really, this is not my speciality. But he asked me, would you mind helping? So I used to sit with her once a week. And once a week, sitting with her, while reading with her, I realized that she wasn't able to summarize the information. She could remember very strange details, but she wasn't able to summarize the main point in a story or a non-fiction piece. And so I started designing different games, and then at some point I came up with something using a different approach and cards, and then asking her to choose. And eventually, she got the idea. And she said to me, why has nobody ever told me that before? Why didn't anybody tell me this? And I said, well, everybody has that automatically, but you were just not thinking like that. Now that you know how to do it, you will probably be fine. And we gave her some strategies. But the reason why I'm sharing that story with you is because actually that parent asked me to go with him to her school when she was in the public school system, and asked me to sit in the parent interview with her, with him, so that I could understand what they had found, because I felt like I had understood what her issue was. And so, subhanAllah, when I sat there, I was very shocked, to be honest. The homeroom teacher wasn't really able to help her within the classroom, so she went to certain spec ed classes. And, when I sat in that interview, there was a lady there that had done some testing, and she was supposed to unlock all the answers. And I said to her, what tests did you do? And she said, well, I tested her and compared her with kids who have spoken English, since their birth. And I was very taken aback. And I said to the father, does your daughter speak another language? And he said, no, she speaks English at home. She speaks English with her siblings. She speaks English to us. She doesn't know any other language. And so I explained to her, here's what I have found. And I said, she doesn't speak another language, so why would you choose to do that test? And you see the biased thinking. So in actual fact, she said, I have done the wrong test. By the end of that year, she was in grade 5, by the end of that year, she was able to complete grade 6 work, just with a different way of thinking, different way of organizing the information in her mind. And I think it's so important for us to sort of think about that, because I don't have an education background. I'm a biologist by profession, but I have an interest in children, and I have an interest in the way that they think. And as a layperson, I was able to sit with this child and sort of figure things out a little bit. And I think sometimes as parents, we think, I'm not a teacher, so I cannot do this. Well, nobody knows their child better than you. You know your child better than anybody. And if you just sit and try to problem solve with your child if they're struggling, you will be amazed at actually what you can accomplish and what you will find out, and especially the bond that you will create together, right? Just in that listening process. Keep your backpack neat. So this sounds like a very strange thing, but if if I said to you, I am going to take a bag of cheesy chips, I'm going to crunch them up, I'm going to put them in the bed, and then I'll throw a few pens in there that are leaking, and I will shove in some crumpled up papers, you wouldn't feel like getting in that bed, right? So if the state of your backpack looks like that with lots of junk in it, you're not going to feel like doing the work that is in there. You're not going to take pride in it. Having a neatness and a pride in what you have is really important, and having a neat backpack with everything organized in it is very important. It's a mindset. It helps you feel like this is important. You're giving yourself a mental message right there. And then to get yourself organized before you go to bed. So kids, my daughter always thinks of this, of course, last thing at night, I'm in bed, and I find my daughter wandering the hall. Where are you going? It's bedtime. Why are you not in bed? And she'll say, I'm getting things ready for the morning. And, so organizing your time obviously is important. You can't do that and miss sleep, but at the same time, being ready the night before is much more important. We have some kids at school, and I see some of them, and, sometimes after Salah, after we pray together, they will creep because they will want to put their shoes on. And so I find this very curious because they haven't been dismissed yet. And I will ask them, why are you running to wear your shoes when everybody hasn't gone yet? And they will say, my shoes take a long time to put on. And so I will say to them that if you think ahead and you undo your laces a little bit before you pray, when there's a little bit of time, then when you go to put them on, it will be very quick. And they will say, oh, yes, right? It's just a little bit of forethought. And I think sometimes, because we live in a digital age where everything is at our fingertips, kids, you want to learn about something, you can Google it. Most of us oldies that are here had to walk to the library to find out something, right? We couldn't find something out instantly. We had to go and physically search for information. That gave us a little bit more patience, but it also gave us a little bit of, I think, planning skills, because if you wanted to go, you had to go when the library was going to be open, or you had to think about limited resources, where you would find that out from. It wasn't open season all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that is something that I think is missing, and I think that makes us rush with everything and leave everything until the last minute, and that's dying in our society. So one of the things is being prepared. So managing your time well, I've touched on this, but using the class time well. I find that a lot of kids waste time in class, and then when they come home, they end up bringing a lot of it home. And that's stressful for you. So it becomes a vicious circle. You don't want them to have lots and lots of work at home, and it's frustrating as parents because you think, why didn't you finish this when you could have? But sometimes focusing is not easy. So again, a lot of those habits are built from a very young age, being able to sit, being able to do things. My children get dragged everywhere with me from when they are very young. They have no choice. I used to sit on a committee with the Ottawa Police Service, and I would go to meetings, and my kids would have to go with me. My husband travels a lot, and so he would often not be there to take care of the children. So I had to train my kids to be able to sit in those settings. And when we were growing up, the philosophy was children are seen but not heard. And I think a lot of people end up just quickly giving a device to a child. And I see this a lot, where you just give your child a phone or an iPad or a device and say, here, just, sit quietly. And that's okay. I'm not criticizing parents that do that. My children would love it. I mean, my daughter would love it if I gave her my phone all the time. Sometimes if I'm stuck in a situation, I will give it to her. I will let her. But it will be limited, and it will be limited in a way that I dictate. So, what I did with my children when they were young was I brought lots of things for them to do, whether it was cutting paper, whether it was, beading on pipe cleaners or doing something, and I would take all this stuff with me, but they would sit quietly and they would do things, and they would learn to sit for longer and longer periods of time so that they had the patience to be able to do things. Thank you. It's very important that your child develops that skill of learning to sit for longer periods of time without necessarily it being relying on a screen. Because in some social situations, a screen isn't appropriate. And then it's like you're lacking a skill. So, using time in class well comes from being able to sit for long periods of time and focus on something that is not a screen. And I find this in the classroom, that a lot of kids struggle with completing a page of writing. But if I put on a movie, or even if I put on something that's educational, kids will be able to sit for a long time and look at that screen. So it's something for us parents to realize that kids are learning in a different way. You can use it to your advantage as well. My son watched, I don't know how many videos on chemistry, biochemistry, biology, math, technology, so many different things. These things are a tool for learning, potentially, but they can also be a curse. So we have to kind of learn to balance those things and figure out what we're losing in the process. Kids, you should create your own study plan. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do this. At Furqan School, we have a different way of teaching because we have very small groups. And what we tend to do is the teachers come in and the teachers teach everything up front. So the kids learn math and science and whatever it is that they're doing for the day. And then they're told, okay, go. And it's amazing to see kids say, well, I'm going to start with my journal writing because I enjoy writing. And someone else will say, I'm going to start with my math because I don't enjoy math, so I want to get it out of the way. And subhanallah, we just see this independent learning that comes up, and it's incredible to see that in kids, and we try to nurture that at our school. But kids, when you're at home, create a study plan and say, okay, I'm going to do this first, then I think I'll do that, and then I think I'll do this, and it works. Also, prepare for disruptions. And by that, if you have kids and you have younger kids, or you have other things going on in the house, your kids are going to be disturbed while they are studying. And so one of the things that you should do is help plan for that with your children and say, listen, you can sit here and do work. What will you do if your little brother comes in and starts running around? What will you do if he switches the TV on because he's earned his TV time and you haven't finished yet? It's all about sort of preparing. And one of those things is that it is much easier to prepare a fire by putting wood on that fire than to try and put out a fire that has, lost control of itself. And so asking a child to prepare for disruptions gets them thinking about, well, I think I will do this, I will not do that. If that happens, I think this is how I will deal with it. And again, it's that preparation mentality. It's not just dealing with things as they happen in front of us, because kids are not always adept at doing that. So being successful in the classroom means being in school on time. And I know, as a community, we struggle a little bit with timekeeping, okay? So, it's a little bit of a challenge for us. Getting to places on time is a little bit of a challenge. Even at events, we start late, and I've often seen kids coming to school late, and it's unfortunate, So getting there on time or early is a really good habit. Learning to adapt to different teachers. This is a struggle for some kids. They are good with one teacher or two teachers, but having different faces, they don't cope very well. So again, It's about, how can I use those adaptive skills? That's where, if you are a parent and you've enlisted the help of lots of different people, your child will be used to dealing with lots of different people. If you are not, then your child hasn't learned how to cope with that very well, and that shows in the classroom. Be prepared for class, all the things that I talked about before. Sit where you will focus. This happens a lot even in kindergarten. It's very effective where, if a child is regularly disruptive, for example, on the carpet, and I will say to that child, you know what? Can you find somewhere where you can focus and choose where you would like to sit, where you know you are going to focus the best and be able to listen to this story? I will see that child immediately feel very good. So again, that's a trick you can use at home as a parent. Where will you focus best? Because if you give the child a choice, they will usually try to make good choices. So they won't say right in front of the TV, right? And if they do say that, then you can say, well, let's try it and see. And usually they'll want to prove you wrong, so they may actually do fine. But, most of the time, you can, ask a child to sit somewhere. And in fact, those kids that are disruptive on the carpet will move somewhere, and then someone will start wanting to play with them on the carpet, and they will give that child a very stern look, as if to say, I've chosen to sit here so I can focus. And they're only 5 years old, but they're able to determine, that agency in learning for themselves. So, being aware of your body language. I always know, for example, in a classroom when kids are not interested, they're slouching, or they're leaning on the table, they're tired. All of those things, although they are giving the teacher a message that you're not interested, you're also giving yourself more of a message that you're not interested. And there's no way you can learn if you are telling yourself and your body is just, slowly, it gets worse and worse and worse. And so one of the important things is to, think about how you sit, and, sitting up actually helps you learn better. So always completing homework, being a good group member, participating in class, treating others with respect, involving your parents. So kids, talking about what you learned at school isn't just, something that you have to do to keep your parents happy. In fact, it will reinforce the concepts for you. So telling them, well, we learned about this today and we learned about that today. And sometimes your parents may know more than you, and so that's a great conversation that you can have. And then it's not a conflict conversation that centers around, why didn't you do this? Why aren't you doing that? Why didn't you empty the dishwasher this morning? Why did you wake up late? Often those conversations between parents and kids happen, and they're a day-to-day thing. But if you talk about those neutral things, it can help, right? And then taking responsibility for your grades. So very often, unfortunately, we find that kids are very much of the opinion that, the teacher wasn't good, or the teacher didn't explain it properly. And I am going to tell you that, you live in a golden age where if you don't get an amazing teacher, which can happen, right? Let's be honest, some teachers can be boring. And some teachers aren't very good at explaining. It can happen. They're human beings, right? Maybe they don't teach you in the style that you enjoy. And so one of the things that you can do is you can go home and you can use all manner of resources to just learn the material that they were going to teach you, or they were trying to teach you. And, that method worked very well for my son, who found that, going home, reinforcing the concepts, writing up notes, trying to link it to what the teacher said, just created a far better learning environment. So especially if you are in high school, that is what you should be doing. You should be going home and looking at the topic again, even if your teacher didn't assign you something for homework, and trying to get to learn a little bit more. Now that sounds annoying and it sounds like a waste of time, right? But I can tell you, if you get into that habit, you will breeze through high school. You'll be an expert, and teachers will notice. If you study in groups, that's also a huge bonus, where you study together. Taking good notes. So it's very hard to be a good listener sometimes, and we are used to now a lot of screen time where we're just watching and we're not doing anything at the same time, right? So kids are growing up in a world where they are just watching something. When we were growing up, we had to listen and take notes. And there is some benefit in that because it makes you listen. Actually, even I struggle with focusing. So sometimes when I would attend, for example, meetings, I would tweet what was being said on Twitter, because I felt like this is in the public interest, but also it really helped me focus because I had to summarize what was happening. So, there's all sorts of things that you can do that will really help you focus, okay? And, taking notes can actually help you pay attention to what's being said, but there's an art to it. And the truth is that university hasn't changed that much compared to some of the tools that are used in elementary to keep you happy. So really, really learning to take good notes is an important trait. Learning, it helps you to recognize important information. So, a lot of things are not important, but something might be important, and that's what you have to kind of be a detective and figure out what's the important thing here that I really need to remember. And you become able to develop those critical thinking skills. And take notes that are easy to read. It's sad, but a lot of kids, I will say to them, okay, what does this say? And they can't read their own handwriting. So you've got to be able to come up with a way that you can take notes without, with being able to read it yourself. And go over your notes as soon as possible. So preferably when you get home, go through those notes again. Right? You're going to find that if you can find supplementary material, you'll be an expert at that topic. Know how to read a textbook, so scanning it, reading with purpose. So one of the things here is the Beatles changed their image might be a title. You need to be asking yourself, how did the Beatles change their image? And if you're not asking those things, we all read material, and then after we've read it, kind of sit there and think, what did I just read? I don't even remember what I was reading, right? Our mind can wander. But if you break it down again, if you have lots of text, add titles to it so that it helps you understand what you have just read. And review it, preferably 1 or 2 days later. So study smart. Okay, and there are lots of ways to study smart. I've given you some of the ideas here. Find a good place to study. Know how to study for tests, and this is a really important thing. So this was something that I did not master until the final year of my undergraduate. And I really thought, gosh, why has nobody ever told me this? So one of the things that I found that was useful was summarizing everything from a particular topic or a unit onto one page. And I would not give myself more than that page. So I had to cram everything in. And so all you do is you use different colors to take these notes. But what you do is you write the things that you will not remember. A lot of times when students create notes to study, they write everything. And then you're kind of wasting your time. And then you will not retain, you will not separate the information that's important. So in order to take a test and study for a test, you only write down what you won't remember. And then you study from that. Because you already know what you know. Why would you write that down? It looks pretty, but it's not going to help you pass the test. Okay? Getting started, knowing your learning style, organizing your study time, knowing how to memorize and remember information, and that's a whole other lecture on its own. So I'm not going to cover that today, but using tricks when you are making a presentation or a speech, and knowing how to write. And I can't stress that enough. I find that a lot of kids, I'm sorry to say, especially boys, don't really enjoy writing. And that's a problem, because writing is really thinking on paper. So, you know, a lot of boys are very articulate verbally, but they don't enjoy writing. And so nurturing that can be through introducing, you know, fiction from a very early age, you know, getting them to start a diary when they are young, or just, you know, developing that interest in drawing. I also find that a lot of parents stress very early that their kids should learn to write and to write their name and so on. I'm not a fan of that, actually. I think that, you know, the longer you wait, the better it is for the child. Because then they're developed enough, their motor skills are developed enough to be able to write. And so actually those kids that sort of write a little bit later, their handwriting is usually better than kids who've been forced to write from an early age and their pen skills are not as strong. Okay? Be a good test taker. So I'm going to go through those steps. So be prepared with all your supplies, you know. Don't start a test with not having everything there and ready. Try to relax before the test, okay? Write anything that you might forget at the top of the test or on an extra paper, because it may be that you just quickly crammed it, and so it's good to write those things down. You'll feel comforted in that. And put your name on the test and read the directions carefully. A lot of the time, teachers say this all the time, read the test properly, read the test properly. Often kids who are in a hurry will not read the test properly, and then they make silly mistakes, and that's very common. So scan over the whole test and break it up, and you have to look at a test and analyze it in a different way. So first, you should start off by putting a dot or a check mark next to hard questions. So you've scanned it and you thought, oh, you know, quadratic equations. Oh, I was dreading this was going to come up, so I'm going to put a dot next to that because I know I'm not very good on that, right? Advanced algebra. Oh, I was hoping that wouldn't come up. It has come up. I'll come back to it, okay? Go back at the end and work on them again, because you knew from the beginning that you weren't strong on those. So those are the ones. Again, what you know you're good at, you don't need to go over again, right? It's what was hard for you is what you need to revisit. Don't waste a lot of time on difficult questions, because this increases your stress. So if you spend a lot of time on very difficult questions, you don't have time to complete everything, and that makes it more frustrating. So do the things that you're very solid on and very good on first, and come back to the things that are hard for you closer to the end. I'm going to skim through this because I don't want to go on too long, but there are tricks for answering multiple choice questions as well. I won't go on into those in details. Same thing for true and false questions. There are tricks, and I'm happy to, Imam Ziad, I'll share this slide deck with you. You can put it on the website, so, you know. Again, know how to approach essay questions. So again, the question of writing comes up. Parents, often, your kids will actually do better, especially reluctant writers, will do better if you allow them to type it. So, yeah, Ibrahim, don't get any ideas. That isn't a signal to just let you have a device. Take it offline. Make sure it's not online and it doesn't have any games, so it is literally just like a typewriter. But kids will be able to write more using a keyboard sometimes. So give them that option. And, you know, read each question and then start with the easiest one that gives you confidence and time. And look at how many marks questions are worth and plan the time properly. Again, planning, organizing. Brainstorm for keywords and ideas. You can underline things as well, and just get started. And if you get stuck, write down what you know. At least you'll get partial credit. Don't just give up. If you're not sure, don't give up. Just write down what you know. So you can improve your math scores by estimating, if you can. That's usually a good trick, is what do I think this answer might be? What's a logical answer for this question? Try drawing for word problems. I myself am very poor at math. It's my worst subject. So I often draw diagrams for questions, especially word problems, so that I know what they're asking me, right? That's the way that I find it much easier. Don't spend too much time on any one problem, and show all your work. Again, parents, you guys will tell your kids, show all your steps. Why are you skipping steps? All your kids are in a hurry. But actually, if you get the wrong answer, that's all you get, is an X, right? If you've shown some thinking, you can get some of the marks, right? And it's a good habit to be in. So reducing your test anxiety is very important. How many of you would be able to use a computer without a password? You can't, right? It's very difficult. So start studying early, because you can't expect to come in at the 11th hour and just be able to do something. Mentally practice going through the test, review it the night before, and then sleep well and walk in confidently. Again, your posture. You're giving yourself, your brain, a message that you can do this. Deep breathing, starting at the top of your head and then relaxing, closing your eyes and thinking of a happy place. All right? And get help when you need it. So subhanAllah, there's a story of an elephant. They tied this elephant and then they kept hitting it. And it was tied, so it could no longer, it couldn't escape the beating at all. And this elephant was just stuck. And so eventually, when they had done this so many times, even when they cut the rope and they hit the elephant, it just stays there. Okay, so we become conditioned to this. And you are not tied to a rope. You are able to problem solve, and you're able to get help when you need it. So ask for the help. Don't, disable yourself. Tips for parents: show interest, discuss classes, and help your kids set some goals. Listen. I'm guilty of this. I've got 100 things to think about. I'm always running everywhere, and it's almost, those times I often say to my daughter, I was blessed with 2 children who don't stop talking, and so I often just want time to myself to think, and I do not get that time. It's very important to take that time and to listen, and be available to help, provide the structure, encourage school involvements for your child. So get your child interested in joining clubs and activities in the school. They will enjoy school much more. Monitor activities and jobs yourself, but also for your kids. Know your child's abilities, like don't demand A+ if your child isn't capable or ready yet to get A+, right? You have to meet your child where they are and work with your school. For my kids, obviously I run my daughter's school, but even for my son's school, I joined school council and really got to know the principal, the vice principals, and the teachers, and really enjoyed being a part of that school community as a result of that. There's no reason why you can't go and sit in parent council meetings once a month. It's once a month in the evening, and you are visible, you're there, and you know what's going on. I found out so many things that were happening in the school because, your children can't possibly tell you everything that's happening. So it's very important to be involved. Almost at the end here. So balance your own work and play, but also balance things for your children. You can't do a good job if your job is all you do. And so it's about balancing those things very carefully. Do not nag about school grades. Allow your child to miss school unless they are really sick. criticize a teacher in front of your child, make your child's success, do not make your child's successes or failures your own, and do not have expectations that are unrealistic. How much time do we have? Okay, so I'm going to just share this video with you. That video is actually just available online in YouTube, and if you search for how to make your bed, it's a really interesting video, and it talks about a lot of those life skills that we want our kids to have. So what I was planning to do at the end was hand out some papers and give parents a test so that they had to summarize everything that I said. And if you feel a small sense of panic, then that is a fraction of what your kids go through on a daily basis, right? Like if I was to make you do that, you would feel quite... I'll do it after your khutbah. And, we will really, what we have to understand is that our kids are under quite a bit of pressure at times. So just providing that love and support and comfort and stable, structured environment at home with a routine will help your children immensely. And that's all I had to share with you today. Thank you so much for listening.
I gave a khutbah one day on Friday, and I came down, and one brother comes to me and says, "MashaAllah, nice khutbah." And I asked him, "What did I talk about?" He said, "About Islam." I said, "I know." Anyways, any question?